From inside the Banner offices along the Inner Harbor, it is the Banner Ravens podcast. Paul Mancano and Jonas Shaffer live on a Thursday in April. We are 3 weeks away from the start of the NFL draft. Jonas, you are back from your excursion to San Francisco to cover the Terps out there and all of the drama that has happened in between, coaching change and everything. Are you excited to talk about a stable franchise like the Baltimore Ravens?
Very stable franchise.
The most stable franchise of all of them. Today, we're going to talk about the Ravens' biggest draft needs. We're going to talk about some news and notes. John Harbaugh getting extended, what we've learned from both Harbaugh and Eric DeCosta down at the annual league meetings. But first, Banner Ravens podcast is brought to you by Toyota. It's the perfect time to check out a spacious and reliable new Toyota SUV like the RAV4. With available all-wheel drive and plenty of cargo space, you'll go from errands to adventures in no time. Plus, available features like wireless charging will keep you connected. Or check out the Grand Highlander. With seating for up to 8, it's a hub for family adventure. Your Toyota dealer is getting new vehicles in stock regularly, so don't wait. Find deals on a RAV4 or Grand Highlander at buyatoyota.com. Toyota, let's go places. All right, Jonas, let's get right into who's got it better than, because this is an award that we hand out every podcast, except for the times that we forget. Last episode was one of the times that we forgot. John Harbaugh wins our Who's Got It Better Than award. I think this is his first time ever winning. This award is fairly new. We're giving it to John Harbaugh because he has signed a contract extension that, frankly, we all knew was coming. But now he is extended through the 2028 season, which, if he sees that through, will be his 21st season with the Baltimore Ravens. That puts him just 8 seasons behind Curly Lambeau for the most with one franchise all time. And of course, he is still one behind Mike Tomlin for the longest tenured coach in the NFL. Jonas, we knew this was coming. This was never in doubt. John Harbaugh is locked up.
Yep. Sorry for the people who were still holding out hope. Just like the soldiers in Korea who never got the message that the war was over.
Oh,
like,
man.
This war, it's history. This was always going to happen, barring. I guess it's a good thing that John Harbaugh got a deal done before the tariffs hit, and everyone's pocketbooks were severely compromised because he's getting paid a lot of money. I think he and Rappaport reported that it's more than what Jim Harbaugh what got from the Chargers, and I believe that was $16 million annually. So, he's going to get paid a lot of money because he's a Super Bowl coach, because he's coached MVP level talent, and this team is perennially in Super Bowl mix. Haven't gotten there, and of course that's going to be the hang up for a lot of people. But listen, if next year goes really, really bad, then you can just fire him, and it's not like it's going to crimp your salary cap management. This is just how it works. You can pay a coach as much as you want. It's a separate pot from what the players get. And it just goes back to Steve Bisciotti. He feels like John Harbaugh is still the guy to lead this team, because few coaches have been better at putting these teams in positions to succeed. Is he a perfect coach? No, but there are no perfect coaches out there.
Yeah, and we just saw Steve Bisciotti sit down for an interview that the Ravens ran on their website with John Harbaugh, and he obviously praised the continuity and the job that he's done, and it just, given everything that we've heard from Steve Bisciotti, from Eric DeCosta, Eric DeCosta and John Harbaugh are considered foundational pieces of this organization in the same way that Lamar Jackson is. They are considered pillars of this team. And so John Harbaugh, the CEO head coach, runs the business that Steve Bisciotti likes. He runs it stably. He runs it, very well every year. And even though they haven't won a Super Bowl in 12 years, Steve Bisciotti said he wants to win now, which, shocking. I don't know what owner doesn't want to win now, but it is a business. And as a CEO of that business for Steve Bisciotti, John Harbaugh does what Bisciotti likes.
Yeah. The biggest difference between Lamar and John Harbaugh, besides the
biggest difference,
besides the cavernous gap in salary, is just like
athleticism.
People go to stadiums wearing Lamar Jackson jerseys, that they don't go to stadiums wearing John Harbaugh jerseys, and that is I think typical of modern fandom, where you root more for players, even perhaps across franchises. When you see people are more interested in being LeBron fans than they are in being Miami Heat fans or Lakers fans, but John Harbaugh has backers, but people feel more strongly about what Lamar Jackson does when he does things well than when John Harbaugh does things well.
Right.
People are going to be sharing highlights of Lamar Jackson 80-yard touchdown bombs. They're not going to be sharing clips of John Harbaugh taking a timeout or going for it on 4th and 1, because chances are the people that he's using to do that, to leverage his coaching talents are Lamar Jackson or Kyle Hamilton or Marlon Humphrey. And, he knows that's the deal. This is the world that we live in, where the player is the one who is deified, not the coach. But again, that's why you get paid over $60 million a year to make those decisions and to, put yourself in a position to make even more if you continue to have this kind of success.
My question for you, Jonas, when we get to 2028, will John Harbaugh be the longest tenured coach because Mike Tomlin will no longer be in Pittsburgh?
I guess it depends on the draft. Like, if the Steelers take Jackson Dart and show a little bit of promise, or even show any promise at all, then I guess you have to give him a little bit more tenure, right? You have to give him a little bit more leash.
Yeah.
It's just every time we expect Pittsburgh to go sub 500 and they don't. And again, it's a bit of the Harbaugh corollary there, where Tomlin is doing enough every single year to keep his job. And I know that's very frustrating to Steelers fans, but the Rooney family has decided that he is the best steward of that team, just like Steve Bisciotti has decided that John Harbaugh is the best steward of this team. And they're the ones signing the check. So until they are forcibly overthrown or convinced otherwise, it's going to be Mike Tomlin season in Pittsburgh, just like it's John Harbaugh season in Baltimore.
Forcibly overthrown. Jonas is predicting a coup d'etat in Pittsburgh. All right. Well, let's talk about what we learned from the Ravens' top decision makers down at the annual winter meetings in West Palm Beach. Gianna Hahn, the Baltimore Banner, is down there. She's been writing constantly on the BaltimoreBanner.com, which, by the way, you can subscribe $1 for 6 months there. But Jonas, we've got to start with what John Harbaugh had to say about Lamar Jackson's contract discussions. He specified that those discussions are happening internally, not that they are happening between Lamar. I would say Lamar's camp, but he doesn't have an agent, between Lamar and the Ravens, but that the Ravens are internally talking about Lamar Jackson contract extensions, which, if you really think about it, isn't too newsworthy. They should be having internal conversations about this stuff every day. But he did say it's going to happen. It's going to happen at some point. And we knew this. Feels like we were just here. We were just having these conversations about getting Lamar signed. But after the Josh Allen extension, we, saw that this is another contract that is going to be on the horizon for the Ravens.
Yeah, I mean, this feels like the more boring sequel to the blockbuster action thriller. Like, we've been to this movie. We know how it plays out. We know that because of what Lamar has meant to this franchise, there is going to be a need for a third movie and then a fourth movie. So it's just a matter of like how this thing is going to end, because we know it's going to end in a way that we think benefits all parties. Like, the Ravens can't carry on without Lamar. Lamar has to know that getting a deal done helps his pocketbook and also helps the team, with the roster management for the next 2 years. So it's just a matter of, you have this benchmark that Josh Allen's given you with the 6-year extension worth $330 million overall, $250 million guaranteed. Figure it out from there, just like the Ravens figured it out with the Jalen Hurts situation a couple of years ago. So to me, there's a lot less drama than there was, 3 years ago at this point, about how this is going to end, whether Lamar is going to ever play another down for the Ravens. We know it's going to happen because he's under contract for a few more years, but you want to get this deal done as soon as possible, just frankly for our sanity, because we are sick and tired of talking about these salary cap figures and how it's going to help everything. Just show me the money, basically, so we can move on to more important things or more interesting things.
Exactly.
Because I don't know if there's anything more important than this.
And another topic that John Harbaugh appeared to close the book on was Mark Andrews' potential trade talks. He said that he fully expects Mark Andrews to be a Raven in 2025. And the quote that stuck out to both of us was, he's just too good of a player. And that's really what it comes down to. The only reason, we've said it before, I posted a clip last time about what it would take to trade Mark Andrews and whether the Ravens would be thinking about it. And I got a lot of pushback from people that were saying he's still a really good player. He's still on the right side of 30. Absolutely. He still is an excellent tight end, one of the best in the NFL. He's still a hugely reliable target for Lamar Jackson. He's just entering the final year of his deal, and he has a massive cap hit. That's the only reason we were talking about him as a trade candidate, not because of what he did in the playoff game. That didn't change the Ravens' calculus for who he is. It's just the money and the fact that you already have Isaiah Likely waiting in the wings could be potential, catalysts for a Mark Andrews trade. But at this point, the Ravens have already paid him his bonus that was due a few weeks ago. It seems like it is pretty much fait accompli that Mark Andrews is going to be a Raven for 2025 and maybe only 2025.
Yeah. Slight change in tone from Eric DeCosta at the scouting combine, where he left open the door of a possible roster move with Mark, because at that point he hadn't been paid the roster bonus. Eric DeCosta telling us in Indy that there was no bigger fan of Mark Andrews than him. He's been a blessing to have on the team. Using the past participle, it kind of leaves the door open for maybe moving on from him, maybe keeping him. Seems like they are going with door two. Thinking about Mark and how we haven't talked to him, think about how there are other players on this team that we haven't talked to since the season ended. If putting you on the spot here, but if you were to make like a top 3 power ranking of guys that you would be most interested in having up at the podium at OTAs or the next team session, who would it be?
Are we including Justin Tucker on
Yes,
this?
we are.
I mean, I'd put Mark Andrews number 2.
After Tucker?
Yeah.
And Lamar number 3?
And probably Lamar number 3, yeah. Because, we've heard from Lamar a million times, and also that deadline for getting him extended is not nearly as soon as the deadline for figuring out Mark Andrews' future with this team.
Right.
The idea that this has been said so many times right now by not just John Harbaugh and Eric DeCosta, but by mouthpieces of them as well, is that Mark Andrews is a Ring of Honor player. Guys, he's 29. Like, why are we talking about him like he's 36? Like, that was a red flag for us, I think, because you're already signaling, if you're saying, oh, he's a Ring of Honor player.
Foot in the grave.
Yeah, you're talking about him like, well, his obituary is going to be very, very well written. Like, what? Guys, if he's going to be a Raven long term, you're not thinking about that. When you say about Lamar Jackson, you don't say he's a Ring of Honor type player.
Mm.
You are looking towards the future, and Lamar Jackson is just a year younger than Mark Andrews. So that set off alarm bells for us, because that kind of signaled to us that maybe the end is closer than it might seem.
Yeah, the Mark Andrews matter has been a rich vein of speculation and theory. I think I saw someone on YouTube say that one reason for Mark Andrews' struggles in the playoffs is because the playoffs happen in the winter when it's colder, and type 1 diabetics, of which Mark is one.
And you are another.
Don't step on my don't step on my punchline.
Did I just violate HIPAA?
Perform worse in cold weather, or their blood sugar is more variable in cold weather. And I was like, well, that's news to me, because I was also a decent high school athlete and who also played in the wintertime, and my blood sugar was never an issue. So maybe there are people online, anonymous trolls, who know more about medical stuff than me or Mark Andrews.
You're telling me the internet thinks it knows medical issues better than actual people? Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about other guys that were discussed down at the winter meetings, the annual meetings. See, I'm thinking about baseball, Jonas. It's on the mind. At some point during this podcast, in the next 10 minutes, I have to check into a flight to go to Kansas City to cover the Orioles. So that'll be a fun little break in the middle of our podcast as I refresh my Southwest app. Let's talk about the running back situation, and let's talk about Keaton Mitchell, because John Harbaugh was also pretty bullish on Keaton Mitchell coming back 1 year removed from his injury. He's going to have a full offseason now to rehab. Sounds like John Harbaugh feels like he is in a good spot to potentially, I would say, compete with Justice Hill for more snaps, but obviously everybody's going to be secondary to Derrick Henry.
Yeah, I mean, when you looked at the stats for Keaton Mitchell, were you surprised that it was just 2 yards per carry last year?
I mean, it was not good. I can't think of anything he did last year. I mean, I can't think of any flashy plays.
Yeah, I think he had took a couple games to go and had one nice run, and then just kind of went back to not being able to find a whole lot of holes. And yeah, I mean, again, minor miracle that he was back when he did come back. I still don't know exactly how big a role or how many snaps he's going to get next year because of the offense and because of Derrick Henry and Justice Hill being such a nice 1-2 punch there. Obviously, there's always the nice fantastical notion about having pony personnel, which is 2 running backs in the same formation. It's a little bit better in theory than it is in practice, I think, for the most part, because you need to have either one of those guys be like an awesome blocker or an awesome receiver, or an awesome receiver. I don't really know if either one of those is like a Christian McCaffrey type guy who you can kind of count on to influence the defense that way. But listen, an offense with Keaton Mitchell healthy, 2 years removed from that horrible knee injury, is going to be better than an offense without it. So we've seen these guys drop like flies in previous years at that running back position. So why not be blessed by having Keaton Mitchell as your RB3 / maybe RB4 if Rasheen Ali really comes on strong.
Yeah, let's talk about what he said about what John Harbaugh had to say as well about Trenton Simpson, because his status certainly on this roster, I think, is secure. He's going to have a spot on this roster in 2025, but whether he starts next to Roquan Smith at inside linebacker is a major question. Got benched by the end of the regular season last year. And the Ravens also lost a bunch of depth at that linebacker spot. They lost Malik Harrison. They just lost Christian Welch. Guys are now out of the building, and that leaves very few options right now as they head into the draft. Both of us, and I think we're going to talk about in a little bit, expect the Ravens to take a linebacker, at least one linebacker, with their 11 picks. But John Harbaugh sounded bullish as well on Trenton Simpson's development. Do you buy that, Jonas, or do you think that's Harbaugh just trying to pump up one of his own guys?
I think a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. You look at for all the time that we spent talking about how little cornerback depth there is, or at least that there was until they went and signed Chidobe Awuzie. They have 4 off-ball linebackers total on this team. One of them is Roquan. One of them is Trenton Simpson. One of them is Jacob Hummel, who they signed. Another is Willem Quinkeu, who I think is a holdover from last year's practice squad. So who else was it going to be? You're not going to open up the competition to Hummel and Quinkeu. You just trust that Trenton Simpson is going to take a step forward. I think I saw a tweet this offseason just talking about the transition of college linebackers to the NFL and just how radically different a game it is, because you have RPOs that are much easier to do in college than the NFL. You have the hash marks that are much wider in college. So where you are aligning as a weak side linebacker can be very different. So again, I think John Harbaugh talked about how there was this year 3 spike from Patrick Queen. Patrick Queen was obviously much earlier to getting on the field in Baltimore than Trenton Simpson was, because Trenton Simpson had to get over Patrick Queen on the depth chart. But I do think that there is this developmental curve that is very, very harsh for these young linebackers. And Trenton Simpson's, a diligent, athletic, smart guy. He seems like he's always working out. He's going to have a great, Batman to be his, partner there in Roquan. So if he doesn't find a way to succeed, then the Ravens will move on and find someone who can do a little bit more of a consistent job. But he obviously left a lot of room for improvement based on his 2024 film.
Yeah. All right. Another big topic, obviously, is the status of Justin Tucker on the roster. Just a reminder, the Baltimore Banner has reported that 16 massage therapists at 8 different spas and wellness centers across the Baltimore area have accused Justin Tucker of inappropriate sexual behavior. 2 spas say his behavior was so egregious that they banned him. Sashi Brown, president of the Ravens, did talk about it. And Jonas, he basically confirmed what we had concluded, that the Ravens are going to wait for the league to wrap up its investigation on Justin Tucker before they make a decision as to his future.
And that could be a while. This is a sprawling amount of reporting that we've done, and we've seen just how long the NFL can take to get and to gather all the facts for just like single party investigations. So if they are really committed to having this thing, to not making a move on this matter until the NFL wraps up investigation, I guess there's like an outside chance that it's not even done before the start of the season, which seems kind of crazy, because at that point, Justin Tucker would still be on the team. And I think the benefit toward, if you for some reason want to keep him on this team, because of what the NFL decides, then if he's at least suspended, you don't have to pay that. But if he's still on the team for part of the season, for much of the season, you're having to pay him. And that's a tough thing to stomach. And obviously the Ravens could part ways with Tucker. They could designate him as a post June 1 cut. they would get $4.2 million in salary cap space this year if they do that. But if they are really committed to seeing this through the way that Sashi said that they were, I think we were speculating pretty early on the Ravens would make a move on Tucker pretty early in start free agency so that they could get that salary cap space. Obviously, they didn't, and we just have to wait and see exactly what happens because Roger Goodell gave us no update yesterday about what exactly is happening or when the next shoe might drop.
We don't have to wait very long for me to check into my flight, Jonas. We got about 30 seconds. I'm going to reveal live on this podcast what my boarding position will be. It's going to be thrilling. All right, let's turn the page now. Let's talk about our draft exercise that we have here. And that brings up our word of the day, which is Cinderella.
First proper noun for us?
Yeah, but it is also an improper noun as well. The definition, this is the fifth definition here. A person or thing that achieves unexpected or sudden success or recognition, especially after obscurity, neglect, or misery, often used attributively. First known usage, 1840 to 1850. Jonas, we use Cinderella because it is no longer March, but it is April. This is 4 number 1 seeds in the Final Four. Is this the most lackluster tournament you've seen in a long time? There's not a single Cinderella. Can you name a single Cinderella? No St. Peter's, no Loyola Chicago, nothing.
Nope. I think the women's Elite 8 had more parity than the men's, which is hysterical because usually you could do a women's bracket just by advancing chalk, straight up chalk.
By the way, my boarding position, B60.
Okay.
Not great.
Yeah, that's pretty lame. Yeah, it's been disappointing. I guess we have like 4 of the top 10 Ken Palm teams of all time in this tournament. So hopefully we have some competitive games on Saturday night. It's weird that Duke is kind of likable.
Yeah,
kind of.
You like Cooper Flag's fine.
He's fine. Yeah, it's not as eminently hateable.
Yeah,
as it was in the Coach K years.
Yeah, without Coach K, I think it makes it a little bit easier to stomach. But I'm still not
a fan of Todd Golden for reasons. I'd be rooting for. I guess I'm rooting for Houston because Calvin Sampson's seems like a nice coach.
Sure. Without Syracuse in it, I really have very little stake in the game. For this exercise, Jonas, we've got all the positions on the football field, and you have put them into select categories, and I've moved around those categories because we have the number 1 seeds, have to have 4 number 1 seeds. We've got 4 Cinderellas, and we've got 4 snubs. Let's start with the number 1 seeds. And when we say number 1 seeds, we're saying the most likely position that the Ravens draft early. Could be day 1, could be day 2. But we think these guys are favored. These positions are favored to be prioritized by the Ravens. What is the first position on that?
Edge rusher, which is funny because I think the Ravens finished, 2nd in the NFL in sacks last year. But we are looking at the Ravens kind of careening toward the edge of the edge cliff right now because Adafioye is in his walk year. Kyle Van Noy's in his walk year. We don't know what Adisa Isaac's going to be. We don't, David Ajabo, again, also in his walk year, and we don't really know what he's going to be. Tavius Robinson's only headed into year 3, but, is he really going to be a long-term starter at this position? And we've talked about it a million times, and we'll continue to talk about it a million times more. Just if you want to find high impact guys in the draft at that edge rusher spot, you need to invest early.
Yep. And I think defensive line can go in that same category as well, because how many teams have prioritized guys who can rush up the middle? I mean, Milton Williams was probably the highest paid free agent this offseason because he is a interior defensive lineman who can get to the quarterback. I think there are going to be a lot of guys in both the edge and the interior defensive line category that will be on the board for the Ravens at the number 27 overall pick. And it's great that they have Nnamdi Madubuike under contract for a long time. But beyond that, the depth is a little bit suspect, especially after Michael Pierce's retirement.
Yeah, Travis Jones, plugging up stuff in the middle, but he wasn't as good over the second half of last year as he was over the first. I think you blame some of that on the ankle injury. Broderick Washington, Brody's been a steady player for a couple of years now, but again, he has some He has his good games, he has bad games. So with Michael Pierce not coming back, with Brent Urban still out there, with Travis Jones, I think heading into year 4, and Brody heading to the end of his contract, there is this need to replenish your group. And the Ravens mentality has always been, you've got to earn the right to rush the passer by stopping the run. And I think the Ravens should again have a really good run defense next year. But if Derek Harmon from Oregon is there,
he's my draft crush. I was going to reveal
at
that.
27. Yeah, I mean, like,
I watched tape of him last night, Jonas. Let me tell you, I'm no scout, but that guy can get to the quarterback.
Yeah, he's a nice player, and I don't know how well the fit, how much of a fit there would be next to Madubuike if they would be able to play on the same on the field together. But I think it's pretty much a lock. The Ravens are probably going to take at least 2 defensive linemen in this draft. Maybe 1 nose tackle and another 3-tech, 5-tech, someone who's a little bit more penetrating, somebody who can get after the passer.
Yeah. So edge rusher is a number 1 seed. Interior defensive lineman is a number 1 seed. Then cornerback and safety. And I broke these up into 2, not just defensive backs, because I think the Ravens are going to take both a cornerback and a safety, and perhaps multiples of those positions. Cornerback, you could take an outside guy, make sure that Marlon Humphrey is set in the slot, and have somebody to replace Brandon Stevens. You could take an inside guy, a nickel corner, and move Marlon Humphrey back to the outside. And at safety, we saw how many times the Ravens used that dime package last year. Having a third safety to go with our Darius Washington, who we assume is going to be back, and Kyle Hamilton would be massive.
Yeah, and I think that there are a lot of options that the Ravens could go on day one. I think probably the dream scenario is maybe teams are scared off by Jahdae Barron, the Texas Stars length. He is very fast, very productive, very good, but I think he has kind of T-Rex arms for the position. I don't think he's going to fall anywhere close to 27, but if he does, then he becomes the guy who you could drop in as a deep safety, asked to be a slot cornerback, just do a lot of Kyle Hamilton type role stuff, even if he's doesn't look like Kyle Hamilton. But yeah, I mean, like, I think the skeleton key in this whole calculus is Marlon Humphrey, and I guess to a lesser extent Kyle Hamilton, because both those guys could be in the slot, and that means that you could go find an outside cornerback, but Marlon Humphrey also has been a very good outside cornerback, and that means that maybe Kyle Hamilton could go back into the slot, and you can take a safety. So I think it's much better that the Ravens have this flexibility that they do to really open themselves up to a lot of possibilities for their best player available approach. And it seems like there are a lot of really good guys who, again, would be available at the back end of that first round. I mean, every time I look at a mock draft, which at this point is like every other hour, I'm just overwhelmed by like how much more attractive the options would be relative to where the Ravens would be taking that first round pick compared to like, the guys at the top of the first. Like, are you that confident in, a Mikael Williams or I don't know, a Will Campbell, just because of their skill, but also the very many questions that are concern their position, their length, or whatever.
I want to get your thoughts on the top 2 safeties here. Nick Emenwari, the South Carolina safety, and Georgia safety Malachi Starks. Which of those 2, because I've heard different opinions on both those 2, not which of those 2 do you think will be the better player, but I'm curious from your standpoint, Jonas, which do you think would be a better fit with the Ravens, Emenwari or Starks?
I think probably Starks. I haven't really dug too much into those guys' film just because of all the Terps and NCAA basketball stuff. But there was a Bruce Feldman story yesterday that was very complimentary of both. It was just a mock draft based on everything that he's heard, and obviously he's very well connected with college football coaches. And I think there was a lot of positive stuff in the Emenwari profile where he said, like, within the South Carolina program, he's known as Nick the Eraser, and obviously he's this one-of-one athlete, but he does have some flaws in coverage where he's a little bit slow to open up his hips. He doesn't take great angles as a ball carrier, so maybe you wouldn't feel super comfortable with him as a deep safety. Maybe you feel more comfortable as a box safety, but again, that's kind of the Kyle Hamilton role. Whereas Starks started early at Georgia, which is no small thing, just considering how absurdly talented that defense has been year after year. I think he's a 3-year starter. Didn't have a great junior season this past year, but he is more of that prototypical deep safety. I think I believe Georgia used him more in the slot this year, and that's kind of where some of his struggles lined up. You could still use him there to have that, mysterious element to where Kyle Hamilton is going, where Malachi Starks is going. But I do think that probably, again, without a whole lot of digging into their film, my instinct would be Starks. But, the Ravens love their physical freaks, and Emin Wari is definitely one of those.
So those are our number one seeded positions: edge rusher, interior defensive line, cornerback, and safety. Are 4 Cinderellas here, Jonas. These are the positions that we think would be very unlikely that they were selected on day 1, but certainly day 2, day 3, these positions will be in play. Start with wide receiver. And we can throw kind of punt returner, kick returner into that category as well, because that's a position that John Harbaugh said after the season they would have liked to do better than the guys that they had, because that obviously between Deontay Hardy and Sims, that was a rotating cast of characters, and they were never able to get that figured out. They did bring back Tylan Wallace. That's great, but they could probably upgrade at that position as well. Wide receiver, though, I think is a position that they will probably take at the earliest with a round 3 pick. The fact that they brought in DeAndre Hopkins mitigates that need a little bit, but you don't know what you have in Devontae Walker. You feel good about Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman at the top. You brought back Tylan Wallace, but you could probably take another developmental piece when you're looking next offseason, when DeAndre Hopkins is going to be a free agent and Devontae Walker maybe won't be fully developed.
Yeah, and I think the return aspect of this is probably more relevant to that day 2, day 3 consideration. But you look at someone like Matthew Golden, who had a great year at Texas. He has that return experience at Houston, where he was his first 2 years. He returned, I think, 2 kicks for touchdown in 2023. This year, he had 20 yards return for Texas. He obviously has that great speed. I think he was like 4.29 at the combine. Good route runner.
4.29, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And it doesn't seem like he's going to make it past, 25, maybe even 20.
I saw a mock where he went 12th to the Cowboys.
Yeah. I mean, they love their flashy toys, and CeeDee Lamb doesn't have a whole lot of help, but they're in Dallas, so it would make sense. But if for some reason he falls, I think he could absolutely be the best player available on the Ravens board. And listen, would that make even more of a crunch on the tight end position? Absolutely. And maybe the Ravens would then be kind of forced to actually trade Mark Andrews, because there wouldn't be a whole lot of space for an offense to have the 2 returning tight end, the 2 returning wide receivers, and Matthew Golden and Isaiah Likely and Mark Andrews and Pat Ricard and just everyone that would want the ball. So maybe that would force the Ravens' hand. But again, I think you would absolutely make space for a talent like Matthew Golden, who would be on your team for 4 or 5 years on a pretty cheap deal.
Yeah. All right. Linebacker, inside linebacker is our next position, because of all the guys that have gone out the door that we just talked about, and the fact that we still don't know what Trenton Simpson is going to be this coming season. But I think they need to add, at the very least, some depth. And maybe if they end up using a 2nd or 3rd round pick on an inside linebacker, you have to assume that guy is going to compete with Trenton Simpson in training camp.
Yeah, I think the guy who I would probably race the pick in for at that spot is Jahad Campbell.
Yeah,
linebacker at Alabama, tested well at the combine, is just like a homing missile out there. Just is the kind of guy that you want for the middle of your defense. Again, does that mean he's going to be any good in year 1 or year 2? No, because we've seen linebackers across the NFL be taken very high and struggle pretty early. But he is a guy who I think people are maybe skeptical would make it past like Seattle, because of the Mike McDonald's need for a general in the middle of that defense. But there are other guys who maybe could, who the Ravens could fancy at the end of that 1st round. Maybe if they trade back to like 32, I think you're talking about someone like Carson Schwessinger, who is a former walk-on at UCLA, who has just had this incredible rise, is a very good athlete. I think he had a 3-cone drill at UCLA's pro day that was like Fred Warner level elite. Extremely productive. I think a really good head of hair too. So I don't know how much 1st round buzz there is, but maybe the Ravens kind of surprise us all and say, this is the guy that we can't let get to the 2nd round, because we're not going to be able to get him otherwise.
How about Georgia linebacker Jalen Walker? He's a little bit of a tweener between an edge rusher and a inside linebacker, guy who could drop back into coverage. He's pretty explosive. And Jonas, what I like the most about him is that he acted as the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz in high school. So he's theatrical as well.
He is. You should do a. We should.
If
the
they
Ravens
draft
draft him, you should go back to his hometown and get an oral history of the time that he was the Tin Man. I think that would be interesting. His draft position seems like wildly all over the place. It's clear he's not going to be. It's clear he's not going to make it out of the first round. But some people have him as a first round pick. Other people have him. Mid to maybe late 20s. I think I've seen some mocks where he makes it past the Ravens just because he's not huge. He's not super explosive. He doesn't have great bend. I think the most common comp for him is Frankie Louvu, who, obviously was really, really good in Carolina, was really, really good for the Commanders last year. A guy who you could have be the off-ball linebacker on early downs and then turn into that third down, fourth down edge rusher type that the Ravens obviously would have a need for. But it would be kind of an interesting fit to see what the Ravens would have in mind for his role, because he has been a very, very productive player on a very, very good Georgia defense, but he doesn't really look like a Ravens edge rusher. And would the Ravens take him as an off-ball linebacker if they only plan to use him there 50 to 60% of the time?
Next up for our Cinderella category, interior offensive line. Ravens feel good, at least from what we can tell, about Andrew Voorhees, his ability to step up at guard. They brought back Ben Cleveland for unknown reasons, and they are set at that position, so to speak. They feel like Daniel Falele's set at right guard, but certainly a position where they could use more depth. And Patrick McCary was a wonderful insurance policy all along the offensive line, and especially now that he's out the door, I think you could use some more depth there.
Yeah, I think it's been a while since they've taken a first round pick on a interior lineman besides Tyler Linderbaum. Obviously, he was kind of a generational prospect, so it made sense for the Ravens to take him in that mid 20s or wherever they early 20s that they did. But there are some guys who have been linked to the Ravens that I'm kind of interested to dig in more on. Obviously, I think the big name or one of the two big names is Tyler Booker, who did not test well at the combine. Was reduced to running basically like a 15-yard dash at his Alabama Pro Day, just so that he could improve his 10-yard split, because there was a lot of concerns about just how slow he was at the combine. But he's just a big people mover. I don't know if he would fit well in a zone-heavy run scheme that maybe the Ravens are trending more toward. But he's been an extremely productive guy for Alabama. Obviously, has that SEC pedigree. We know about Ozzie Newsome's connections to the Crimson Tide, but it would be a little bit out of character, I think, for the Ravens to take a offensive lineman who is so athletically deficient relative to your typical first round guy. So maybe they look at someone like Gray Zabel, who again is also somewhat out of step with the Ravens drafting strategy, because they like their guys to have proven it at, if not the highest levels, then pretty close to it. And for them to get a guy out of North Dakota State would be a little bit surprising.
Yeah. And then finally, as our last Cinderella, is the kicker position. How high do you think the Ravens could draft a kicker? Because I think we're both on the same page. We think it's very, very likely the Ravens draft a kicker with one of their 11 picks. They used a 4th round pick on Jordan Stout a few years ago. Could we see a 4th round pick be used on a kicker, Jonas?
I wish I'd gone back and looked at the mock drafts to see where Jordan Stout was projected being taken.
It's a good question.
Also, that whole draft just deserves a caveat, because it was one of the COVID years and everything was just a total mess with projections and medicals and everything like that.
And the Ravens had 18 4th round picks that year. I get it.
Yeah.
But
I don't know. I think this is a situation where you rely on Eric DeCosta to suss out the wisdom of the crowd. I think he's very good about not overreaching for guys when he knows that probably the odds are that player X will be there when we are at pick 100 or 150. That was what was so impressive about the Roger Rosengarten pick. The Ravens didn't make a move for him because their processes and that he was probably going to be there late in the second round. And so even if the Ravens have this need for a kicker, which they obviously do, and even if there are kickers in this draft who they probably will like, are you really going to spend a 5th round pick on a kicker when you are pretty confident that you can get your guy in the 6th round? And if not, your guy than a guy who was pretty close to that in the level of talent. So I would be shocked. I think if you're like putting a number on it in terms of like draft position or draft slot, like what you'd be surprised if it's earlier than 150, 180.
Sure. Stout was 130.
Yeah. So I think maybe 160 as the conservative over under.
Sure. All right. Those are our 4 Cinderellas: wide receiver, inside linebacker, interior offensive line, and kicker. Now our 4 snubs. Start with quarterback. Cooper Rush mitigated the need for a backup quarterback. I'll tell you, Jonas.
Don't say Joe Milton.
Joe Milton. If you can acquire Joe Milton.
Well, I was who acquired him today, right?
No, did he get traded this morning?
He got traded with a 5th to the Cowboys for a 5th round pick.
That's the most Cowboys thing.
Yeah.
It's Trey Lance all over again. I love Joe Milton. Let me tell you.
Everything's bigger in Texas, including the arm strength. Yeehaw.
Go back a year ago, and I was pounding the table for Joe Milton, not Devin Leary. And, well, who's vindicated there? All right. Quarterback, I think Cooper Rush makes it so that you don't need to take a quarterback. By the way, I will say everyone's praising his touchdown to interception ratio. Dude fumbled 9 times last year. I was looking back at it, and I remember thinking, boy, it doesn't seem like he threw a lot of interceptions, but I remember seeing him turn the ball over a good amount. 9 times for a guy that didn't start the whole season is quite a lot. Oh, well. Cooper Rush is going to be the Ravens' backup quarterback this year and probably next year. I think the Ravens could they have 11 picks. They could be a fun little luxury pick. They love their 6th round picks. Took Devin Leary and Tyrod Taylor and all those guys with 6th round picks. So maybe it's a possibility, but it's not going to be a day 1 or day 2 pick.
Yeah. I mean, I think the days of the Ravens finding, or any team really finding potential long-term backup quarterbacks late in day 3 or maybe even day 3 are probably over, just because of how much of a precious commodity quarterbacks have been, and thus backup quarterbacks have been. It would have been fun to speculate recklessly about Jalen Milroe maybe being a possible pick for the Ravens in day 3, but I think the Cooper Rush signing has nipped that in the bud. So, I think there's probably a lot of difference opinion of, guys who are in this draft who might make it to the Ravens radar as QB3 options. But it's just with as many needs and as many developmental projects that the Ravens would like to have along the offensive line, defensive line, it is tough to see the Ravens spending any kind of premium draft capital on a quarterback.
And you could say the same for running backs and / fullbacks. You have Derrick Henry under contract for this year. It sounds like everything that they've said, they want to extend him beyond this year. You have Justice Hill. You have Keaton Mitchell. You have Rasheen Ali, who they took with the 5th round pick. It just doesn't, to me, make a whole lot of sense to throw another body into that mix. But 6th, 7th round picks can't be discounted because those are just lottery chips.
Would you say that you would be more
lottery tickets? I don't know why I said lottery chips.
Which position would you be more surprised to see the Ravens not take a single player at, quarterback or running back?
I think it's more likely that they take a running back than a
really.
quarterback.
I feel the other way.
Really.
Just like, I know I am aware that this is a historically deep running back class and that you could find really good value in round 4, round 5. I just think that because of how short the lifespan of running backs are, because this running back depth chart is set up the way that it is, unless there's a player who really, really catches your fancy, I would just much rather, have the expectation that next year you're going to find another solid to good running back class. And that's when you start over the running back life cycle for your depth chart. I just don't see a lot of value unless there's just no one else, on your draft board in round 6, round 7, and you have to get a running back that the Ravens would take over, again, all the other positions that are kind of up there for need. Like, why would you take a running back before a kicker at a certain point?
And you're taking a quarterback with the 6th or 7th round pick. You're just talking about him competing with Devin Leary. I mean, that's really the only upside you could be talking about there, because you have Cooper Rush. I think it's ultimately, I don't think that they're spending too much time thinking about either of those positions. Right. And then 2 others, you put offensive tackle in here and tight end. Now I'm confused by tight end. I understand. Although I think you wanted tight ends even as a Cinderella. Offensive tackle, to me, I could see this being maybe not day 2 pick. I could see the Ravens using a 4th round pick on an offensive tackle.
When I made this chart last night, it was not necessarily first round consideration. It was just like, which of these positions do they need to get a starter out of?
Mhm.
And the Ravens have 2 starters at that position. They have Ronnie Stanley and they have Roger Rosengarten. So would I be surprised if they took like a Donovan Jackson at Ohio State? Absolutely not, because maybe you have him and you bank on him becoming the eventual Ronnie Stanley replacement, or the injury replacement, and maybe you slide him inside as a guard and compete with Failele or compete with Voorhees. I just don't think that, because of what the Ravens did at tackle last year with Rosengarten, this year with Stanley, there is a need for the Ravens to find a starter early in the draft.
I just wonder, Ronnie Stanley signed that big contract extension. I understand he does have extensive injury history. If he were to go down, are you talking about moving without Patrick McCary now? Are you talking about moving Roger Rosengarten to left tackle to take that spot? I mean, you need some insurance policies there.
Yeah, you absolutely do. But I think it's probably a better idea to find one in free agency, whether it's someone who's out there right now or someone who gets released because the team finds someone that they like who's better, cheaper, whatever. The same way the Ravens have been so good about getting some of these guys who won't count against their comp pick formula, and they know that there's going to be this 3rd and 4th wave of free agents who become available on the cheap. So yeah, I mean, like, obviously there is not great depth at that position with McCary moving on and Josh Jones even leaving Baltimore. But I just think that, are you going to take a tackle before a guard, before wide receiver, before defensive line, edge rusher, wide receiver?
Yeah, no, I think that odds are that they'll take at least one offensive lineman who's either a tackle in the college level and is projected to be a guard, or is projected to be a swing tackle. Like, I think they'll take some versatile offensive linemen too. And so we could be haggling on draft weekend about, is this guy a tackle? Does this count as a guard? But I think that they're going to add to that offensive line in several ways.
Yeah, I think that's probably going to be the position with the most volume of picks by the end of the draft.
We said that last year though, and they only took the one tackle, right? Roger Rosengarten was the only offensive lineman they took last year.
Right.
And I remember going into that draft thinking the Ravens are going to take at least 2. They ended up only.
They did take Nick Samac in the 7th round.
Nick Samac. That's right. As a center. All right. Lastly, tight end. Why do you think this is more of a Cinderella than a snub? Because I think it's very unlikely with the 3 tight ends under contract. I think it's highly unlikely that they take one unless it's with a 7th round pick. But convince me otherwise.
Just because you want to find that next guy, because you don't really know what the future is going to be. I guess that's kind of, I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth because I just used the same logic for offensive tackle. So I probably was wrong to put it in Cinderella. I think I would just put it in Cinderella as like a position that we should not be surprised to see the Ravens make a move at, because if you can find, I don't know, like Colston Loveland's not going to be there.
Yeah.
At 27, but maybe there's someone that you really like in the 2nd round or in the 3rd round that you get. And that means that you
pick. Wow, that'd be wild.
Yeah, I know. I think it's very unlikely, and to add another guy who needs the ball, who needs time and practice to develop, would be a little surprising. But I think there is this looming tight end cliff again with Kohler coming up for a deal, likely coming up for a deal, Mark Andrews coming up for a deal. The saying goes that you would rather be too early to a guy than too late. So if there is someone who is just, tens across the board for you relative to where you are in the draft, then go out and get them. There's so many different kinds of tight ends too. Like it's not so many, but like you can get a slot tight end, but you could also get an inline tight end. Like maybe he is the guy who is the natural replacement to Patrick Ricard / Charlie Kohler, and that means that you can be a little bit more practical in terms of how you handle the Andrews versus likely debate, because you have a guy that can be like a Nick Boyle in Baltimore for the foreseeable future, and you don't have to worry about paying Charlie Kohler $5 to $8 million a year, whatever it would take to lock him down for the next 3 or 4 years.
Right, and I still see this playing out. Everything that we've heard, I'm just trying to read the tea leaves here. The way that I see this playing out now is that the Ravens go into 2025 without extending Isaiah Likely or Mark Andrews or Charlie Kolar. They hope that Isaiah Likely takes another step forward in his development. That allows Mark Andrews to walk and hit free agency. They re-sign Isaiah Likely. And if they have somebody that they've just drafted that they can replace Charlie Kolar with, they'll go with that guy, or they'll just re-sign Charlie Kolar. And they'll go in with Isaiah Likely and Charlie Kolar for next year. I'm just guessing, but I understand, I guess, the idea that you want to add to that position. It's just there's not going to be room on the 2025 roster for a guy that you would draft here. And so you're talking about maybe sneaking, unless there's an injury, sneaking this tight end that you've just drafted through the practice squad and hoping he sticks through. So that's the only reason I could see them waiting a year to draft that guy.
Yeah, I haven't seen like any mock drafts, frankly, and any of the 3-round or longer mock drafts with the Ravens linked to a tight end pretty early on, and it makes sense because they probably have the NFL's best tight end room, or certainly one of the best. But this is a group with, I think, a lot of interesting guys. Like, I don't know how interested the Ravens would be in someone like Harold Fannin, but you can't ignore the production that he had. Arroyo out of Miami, I think, has the injury concerns, I believe, or Mason Taylor does at LSU, but is a outstanding athlete with great bloodlines, the son of Jason Taylor, the Dolphins legend. So there's a lot of guys who I think fit the Ravens prototypes in a lot of ways, but are they going to overreach for a tight end? Probably not.
Right. All right. Well, that just about does it for our draft exercise today and our podcast, which you can subscribe to on any of your favorite podcast platforms, Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts. If you write us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Jonas, I will read it out here on the show. Thanks so much for tuning in. Read all of Jonas's great work on the BaltimoreBanner.com, along with Gianna Hahn and Kyle Goon. So much more Ravens coverage to come over the next 3 weeks as we barrel towards the NFL draft. Follow him on Twitter at Jonas_Shaffer. I'm at Paul Mancano. Thanks so much for tuning in, everybody, and we will catch you next time.